Welcome to America's Commercial Real Estate Show, your source for market intel, forecasts, and strategies. Hello, I'm Michael Bull. Thank you for being with us. This show is brought to you by Lumen. Check them out for financing for healthcare properties, senior housing, multifamily. They have offices all over the country. Also have a great website for getting a loan and then also doing a life with a loan. You'll love what they do. Check them out at lumen.com. Well, today we're going to talk about the restaurant industry, right? Restaurants have really been a major part of retail moving forward. And of course, we're all dealing with restaurants in some way. If we're not invested in them or leasing to them, we're in there eating, right? So it's really cool to get to see what's going on in that industry. Well, please welcome my guest. It's Darren Tristano. He's CEO of FoodserviceResults. Darren, good to see you, sir.
Good to see you too, Michael.
Well, Darren, my first question, it seems like there was not enough restaurants from COVID, and then it seems like there was a lot that opened up in a lot of the retail centers around the country and around the Southeast where we work, including Atlanta. It seemed like a lot of restaurants were opening. How are restaurants overall performing now, and what's the trend there?
Well, I think we see the industry continues to be resilient after every economic downturn, and restaurants continue to grow. We're adding restaurants, filling vacant spaces, and consumers continue to be very interested in going out to dinner. I think what's important for us to look at the consumer is that the stock market is doing well. And although the real estate market is difficult for the younger generation to get homes, it's still showing very high rates of ownership equity. And when we look at the consumer disposable income, I think that's where we're seeing the biggest issue, that inflation has hurt disposable spending and gas prices continue to be high, making it more difficult to go out and to eat at restaurants. But consumers continue, as the younger generation grows, to enjoy dining out away from home and doing it rather consistently. Although traffic hasn't grown much to restaurants, it hasn't declined much either. So we're seeing flat traffic, and overall that's good news for the restaurant industry, who is looking to continue to bring these consumers out away from their home.
Yeah. Darren, what do you see for rent to revenue ratios with these restaurants? Is that trending up or trending down? What's the range that you're seeing?
Well, I think it's going to likely trend down for the rent to revenue ratios. I think what we will see on a nominal basis is going to be increased pricing at the restaurants, likely between 6 and 7% for this year. And on a real basis, it's going to be nearly even, probably 0.1, 0.2% increase. So we will see the sales increasing, but on a real basis, not really. Not a lot of growth. So it's going to be harder for landlords to get more rent out of these locations. And they should be happy getting rent and keeping a lot of these leases filled, and not seeing restaurants closing up and tenants leaving in the middle of the night.
Yeah, good point. Well, Darren, what types of restaurants are faring pretty well right now, and which ones may be struggling more?
So the trend for restaurants continues to be third-party off-premise delivery, tends to continue to grow these days. So consumers want restaurant quality food, but they want to move it off-site. They don't want to go to the restaurant to eat. So restaurants in the limited service space with drive-throughs, with delivery, with very easy curbside pickup will continue to grow and take market share. Restaurants where it's hard to park, where they are not offering delivery, will continue to struggle. So the limited service side of the industry, because of the price points, continues to do well post-COVID. But we are still seeing full-service restaurants working very hard to recover, to show the value at these restaurants. Now, Applebee's or others are going to be working towards better values. So we see Chili's offering 3 for $10.99, or Applebee's offering a deal. And that's going to help them to get more patrons out to the restaurant. But the full-service space still continues to struggle as consumers enjoy dining at home, eating that quality, but seeing the Grubhubs, the Uber Eats, the DoorDashers bringing that food to the doorway. So I think that's what we're going to continue to see for years to come, and especially among the younger generation.
Darren, what are some of the restaurant types and brands that as a landlord or a lender may want to look at a little closer as far as their future? Are there any brands that are kind of closing stores or might?
Well, I think on the full service side, we are going to see closures from larger chain brands that have been around for a while, generally tend to be the middle of the road, mainstream casual dining. Brands like Red Lobster, Applebee's, Chili's, they have the largest platforms, the most stores, so they have the most to lose. And clearly there are just too many of them and they're too big. So that's where I think we're going to see the largest number of closures. The family style segment like Denny's and IHOP have been very good in this environment because of the value they bring to the table. So those stores tend to continue and aren't closing as frequently. And where we're going to see some growth is still in the fine dining and higher end, as we see more restaurants moving towards a polished casual in the full service space. Now, when we look at the limited service side, you're going to see brands like Taco Bell and Dunkin' Donuts and others that are moving toward rural markets and also into the lower income demographic. So, when you're going into these neighborhoods in the city where it's a little bit tougher, where there aren't as many consumers, there certainly aren't the affluent suburban types. That's where these restaurants have a great opportunity because, quite frankly, everyone needs to eat. And if you're not servicing the lower income group, that's where there's going to continue to be some growth, especially when you have value menus on these limited service, these quick service brands that offer the fast food with the dollar value menus. And that's where there's going to be some growth on the limited service side.
A lot of real estate owners have pieces of property they may want to develop or sell. And one of the things that we've noticed from post-COVID and during COVID was some of these quick service restaurants opening more drive-throughs and then maybe even reducing or not using the inside seating. What's the trend there? Is that still a thing?
So the trend continues to be higher growth in offering off-premise food. And what we're really looking at is smaller footprints equate to lower costs. And a lot of times we're seeing these land leases taking place in some of the malls or some of these large parking lots that remain vacant because traffic to malls has been flat or down in many areas. So I think we're going to see the growth of land leases across a lot of the parking lots that are available. And I think when we're looking at stores or developments in the commercial space, I think there's great opportunity to create more stores within a smaller footprint. So I think it's going to generate more leases for a lot of the landlords because they don't need to build 2,500 or 3,000 square foot stores when off-premise is really pushing people to eat away from the restaurant and not in the restaurant. So I think the 1,000 to 1,500 square foot store typically reserved for restaurants that offer ice cream, snacks, coffees, I think is going to shift now so that we can see sandwiches being put there or other types of pizza and ethnic foods that can be pushed out the front door or delivered in order to save some money on rent. And that's where we're going to see kind of that rent to revenue number go up with the smaller spaces and more off-premise work.
That's interesting. And it reminds me of, going through the drive-through and then driving off with a drink in my hand and a sandwich in my hand and steering with my leg. This is dangerous. I love it. What about labor, Darren? It seems like a lot of businesses had trouble for many years getting folks to work. What about restaurants? How's that trending?
Well, I think we always have to look at the unemployment rate, which tends to be very low right now, but the influx of migrants are going to bring labor to the U.S., whether we like it or not. And those people are going to be able to find work in the back of house, which is going to help both full and limited service restaurants. Now, again, there'll be regulations as to who you can and cannot hire, But with this influx, we do have a lot of labor, a lot of people coming into the U.S. who are willing to do the jobs that, quite frankly, many of our youth are unwilling to look at. So it's a good opportunity over the long term, but labor has improved. And as restaurants look at labor and supply chain, these aren't issues that are affecting them as much as they were a year or even 2 years ago. So right now it's about how do we get more butts in seats? How do we market value? How do we bring customers in? And a little bit less about the labor issue today, which is a good thing for an industry that's driven by labor.
Yeah, it certainly is. I remember going in restaurants and like you said, the last year or two where they said, well, the wait's, 40 minutes. And then I'm looking at the restaurant, it's half empty. And they say, well, we just don't have enough staff. Right? So that's changing. That's good to hear.
Definitely changing. But, there is an opportunity for you to continue to go into a restaurant and see parts of that restaurant closed off because they're just not getting enough people. So, I worked for a gentleman who used to say, I'd rather go in and wait at a busy restaurant than be able to get a seat at a restaurant on a Friday night, because the demand and the quality will likely be there if customers are lined up to get a seat. And so I think we're seeing some of the closures. We're seeing some of the interior dining rooms also being shifted, whether it's limited or full service, for takeout orders, and more space being assigned to be able to manage the food that is going out of the restaurant versus the food being served in the restaurant.
Yeah, good points. Well, Darren, I want to see if you can provide some tips for restaurant operators related to finding locations or dealing with their landlords. And then after that, I want to ask you about some tips from the landlord side. But for tenants looking for space, what are some things they might want to think about today?
Well, I think for tenants looking for space, you're always going to want to look at the ingress and egress, and you're going to look at restaurants that are already in that space, perhaps, that how are they doing at lunch and dinner time, and even breakfast, depending on what day parts you're serving. I think it's going to be important to look at restaurants that might be keeping their doors open when in fact they're losing money, and those might be leases perhaps that can be taken over versus restaurants closing. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for operators to look at these spaces. You're always looking for an A space, which is going to be more expensive, but the B's and C's are going to be a little easier to come by, and clearly communicating to the landlord what your financial capabilities are going to be important in creating a relationship with them that allows you to be successful, and ultimately that for them to be successful on a long-term basis.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I think you obviously know this, but some of the times I see that tenants in general, and restaurant tenants included occasionally, are not really prepared to put their best foot forward with a landlord, and show a nice business plan, to show nice renderings, and have their financials in place. Especially when you get these more independent, restaurants, startups, chef driven, and hey, let's see the menu, let's see the business plan, right?
Well, I think you're partnering with a landlord. I mean, they are your biggest partner. You're going to be spending between 8 and 10% and maybe more of your revenues to pay your rent. So the more you can build a relationship and partner with the landlord, the better off you're going to be on a long-term basis. And that's going to help you to establish restaurant number 2, number 3, if that's where you're going. There's still continue to be a lot of mom and pop stores. Very difficult sometimes to get that first store open because you're not a corporate store. You don't necessarily have the history to prove that you're going to be successful. So to the extent you can communicate what you're trying to accomplish and why you're going to be successful in that space, it's going to go a long way with the landlord to give you an opportunity to be successful and to partner with them on the long term.
Good point. Darren, what are some brands, types of restaurants, and actual brands that you see are expanding right now?
So I think that chicken continues to be very successful. It's been on a very long-term positive pace. I think when we start with chicken, we look at Chick-fil-A and the success they have had coming out of Atlanta and really becoming more of a national presence as far as California. So I think Chick-fil-A kind of demonstrates that a brand that's only open 6 days a week can be incredibly successful and drive revenues double what a typical McDonald's can do in a drive-through. But when we look a little bit further, we see brands like Raising Cane's that have come out of New Orleans that are growing nationally and really doing well with younger generations. I mean, who knew that a chicken finger, chicken tender restaurant was going to be this successful? And in addition to that, when we've seen what Popeyes has done with their chicken sandwich, we have seen other brands growing and really created, like Shaquille O'Neal's Big Chicken has done really well and is growing nationally and opening restaurants. So you've got, a guy behind it that's very well known, certainly likes to eat, but has created a chicken concept that is expanding and has found its way into very non-traditional places like cruise lines and other places that are a little bit smaller. So, don't just think that they're going to be growing inside of a standalone or an end cap with a drive-through. These are restaurants that are going to make it in casinos, inside of cruise lines, inside of schools and universities where students are looking for chicken, which is healthier, certainly tasty when it's fried, but also a little bit less expensive than beef. So it's going to be more affordable, create higher value.
Good point. What are some points, Darren, to some tips for landlords and developers when trying to work with restaurant operators and on new spaces or renewals or what have you?
Well, I think that a landlord needs to be open-minded and certainly educate themselves as to the landscape of the restaurant industry. It's important to know that independent restaurants can outperform chains and certainly to give some of them a chance, but to really understand what is their fit, how well will they do with the consumer, are they locally focused, what kind of plans have they developed to be successful, and what is the experience, certainly, of the group that's running it? Because, we see in the franchise space a lot of single operators that haven't even worked in the restaurant industry that think they can get rich. We see a lot of immigrants who have come to the U.S. and have grown very large chain groups within certain markets. So I think it's important to understand how will that restaurant fit in with the rest of the area around it? How does the experience of the operator help it to become successful long-term? And not just focusing on the accounting side of things in terms of, are we going to get the right revenue level? What you really want today is a long-term relationship that will be successful and less turnover, because that keeps your tenant improvement allowance down and certainly keeps the rent flowing quickly.
Yeah, good point. It reminds me, I was leasing a restaurant building, and my client had me pretty much running the show, making the decisions, and we got an offer from a tenant, letter of intent from a tenant, and they had a tenant rep, and based on what they brought in, offered, and the way that everything looked and what they presented, I wasn't comfortable with them being a successful tenant, and so then we got a meeting between the restaurant operator and me, and we were able to sit down and talk, and I was able to get a really good feeling about him and about his business savvy and his history, and I became comfortable, whereas without that personal meeting, I was just not comfortable at all, and I just kind of wanted to stop, working with him. But when we did, his restaurant was extremely successful. Fast forward, 6 or 8 years, we actually sold in the building. Fast forward another 6 or 8 years, and he's a long-term client of our firm. Whereas when that initial LOI came in there, I'm like, I don't even want to work with him.
I think that an operator is always trying to match up their concept with the marketplace, the traffic patterns, the demographics. And I just don't think that landlords look deeply enough into what's going on with this restaurant. So if you're in a affluent market, you really want to bring in a type of restaurant that's going to have the check average and the quality that market is looking for. And certainly if you're in a lower income market, you're looking for something that's fast, something that's affordable, high value. So you really do have to match up the concept with the customer if you are the landlord in this condition. It's not just the operator looking to find a place, it's the landlord knowing that this is where you should be.
Yeah, good point. Darren, what would you leave our audience with to think about for restaurant space?
Well, I'd like to just leave you with one point that I think is good news. I think that we have seen quite a bit of inflation coming from 2023 into 24, and we've certainly seen price adjustments reflected. Now, because inflation is starting to cool, and it certainly is a election year, so it's hard to tell what's going to go on, but very likely inflation is going to remain relatively cool, somewhere in that 3%. I know the feds would like to see it a little bit lower, and it may get there. But because of that, I think it's going to be easier for restaurants to continue without raising their prices even further. And as a result, we may get back to a point where we were before last year and before this 10% inflation. And I think that's going to be helpful to the operator and really stabilize the industry a bit more. So I think that's good news coming, and hopefully lower gas prices will allow consumers to spend more at the restaurants.
Yeah. Wow, that's excellent. That is good news. Darren, thanks for joining us, sir. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right. And thank you for joining us around the country. Hey, please share the show wherever you watch it. Please subscribe, and please get notifications on our website or wherever you're watching or listening to the show. And thank you for doing so. If I can help you in any way, reach out to me personally. My email is an easy one. It's michael@bullrealty.com. And until next week, be sure that you always lead, learn, and laugh, and join us for America's Commercial Real Estate Show. America's Commercial Real Estate Show is brought to you by Bull Realty. For commercial brokerage sales and leasing in the Southeast U.S., contact our show host by email at michael@bullrealty.com. By Commercial Agent Success Strategies, 21 incredible one-hour agent training videos. Learn more at commercialagentsuccess.com. And by Lument. For senior housing, healthcare, and multifamily financing, visit lument.com. For more podcasts and videos, subscribe and visit CREshow.com.